Welcome to the We're Doing It Wrong podcast, a production of WDIW Media, hosted by Joseph Pazar and inspired by David Michael Slater's book, We're Doing It Wrong, 25 Ideas in Education That Just Don't Work and How to Fix Them. Today, I'm excited to bring you a conversation with Dave Burgess, and he is the New York Times bestselling author of Teach Like a Pirate. He also co-authored P is for Pirate, and he's the president of Dave Burgess Consulting Incorporated, which delivers powerful, inspirational, and innovative books, keynotes, and professional development. He specializes in teaching hard-to-reach, hard-to-motivate students with techniques that incorporate showmanship and creativity. At a recent ceremony in Washington, D.C., he was awarded the BAMI for Secondary School Teacher of the Year by the Academy of Education Arts and Sciences. It was a real pleasure to speak with Dave. He has a lot of great ideas that I think need to be magnified, and he also runs a publishing company, and I think they published about 60 books, he said, pertaining to education, so certainly check that out. And without further ado, I bring you Dave Burgess. And I'm excited to be here with Dave Burgess, the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Teach Like a Pirate. Dave, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, it's my pleasure to join you. Thank you for having me on.
I'm very excited to speak with you. I've been a fan of your book for quite some time, so it's great to kind of dig even deeper. But before we launch into any topic that's too specific, I'm curious about when you realized that your work as a classroom teacher was beginning to overflow beyond the classroom. So could you give us kind of your outline of your history as a teacher and work as an educator?
Yeah, I had been teaching in my classroom for several years, and it was about 2005. I had lunch with my department chair, and he came in he's a friend of mine as well. And he came in and he said, hey, I just got put on the professional development committee for the district. And I thought to myself, how cool would it be if you put together a workshop based on some of that crazy stuff you do down in your room that nobody understands? But then he paused and he said something that was super important to me. He said, but you know what, the more I think about it, I don't think you can. Because I think that your success in the classroom is kind of you. I think it's personality driven. I'm not sure it's something you could teach to other people. And so he kind of moved on. I got upset by that. I took it as a challenge. I'm like, hey, sign me up to do one of those workshops. So I signed up to do a full day workshop for the peers in my district. And I drove away from that meeting going like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I don't have a workshop. I don't have this written down. I don't have it organized in any fashion. And so I got relentless about writing down everything I did in my classroom that I thought was successful. But then that wasn't good enough because that's what I do. I had to take it a step back further and try to come up with where do these ideas come from to begin with. And every time I traced back, it came back to the same thing. And it was a question. It was a kind of question I was asking about my lessons that other people weren't asking about their lessons. And so I began to compile those questions. I put it all together. And I think that's something that's important, is that it forced me to become much more intentional about my teaching. It forced me to become much more reflective. It's like, why does this work? And why doesn't this work? And that's why I always encourage people to present, to do sessions, whether it's in your school, whether it's in your district or local conferences, present. And when you're put in a situation where you have to kind of come up with what's my magic recipe? What makes me successful? And then you have to teach that to other people. I think that's a really powerful process. And it forces you to really, it made me a better teacher when I knew that I needed to put together a workshop for other teachers.
I wonder if it's also the easiest way to get feedback on your practice, if that's something you'd agree with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get to see with real eyes staring at you, your peers, what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what hits, what doesn't hit. And so, yeah, I think it does give you a little bit of an authentic audience for your practice. I think that's a good point.
Okay, well, you've heard it, teachers. Get out of your classroom and start testing your ideas on your colleagues. So I was going to ask you, how does one decide to title a book, Teach Like a Pirate? And I just want to read one of my favorite quotes, like right in the beginning. You quote Bern Williams, who says, the average man will bristle if you say his father is dishonest, but he'll brag a little if he discovers that his great-grandfather was a pirate. So how did you come to create such a wonderful title and theme for your work?
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to have some sort of theme. I wanted to be able to model and demonstrate some of the things I do in my classroom in my workshop. Like, if you think about it, it's actually a lot of pressure. If you write up a workshop description that says that you're going to teach teachers how to create a wildly and outrageously engaging classroom that has kids knocking down the walls to get in, like, you better have a pretty dang good workshop, right? You better have if you're going to bill yourself as the engagement guy. And so I wanted a theme, and pirates appealed to me because pirates are unconventional. They're willing to reject the status quo. They're willing to sail into uncharted waters with no guarantee of success. They're risk takers. They're rebels. They're mavericks. So I wanted to embrace that spirit of being a pirate. And then pirates are also known for having hooks. And this was all about how you could design hooks that would draw students almost magically or magnetically into what you were doing in your classroom. And then I'm abnormally obsessed with acronyms. And so the first thing I did is I turned the page sideways. I wrote PIRATE down the page, and I tried to generate an acronym. I knew I wanted to talk about passion and enthusiasm, and there the P and the E were sitting at the beginning and the ends of the word, like the cornerstones of it. And I knew I wanted to talk about building rapport, relationships with kids, as sort of being the heart of teaching. There the R was sitting in the center. And so I never looked back. So I came up with the pirate theme. I think it was about 2005 or 2006 that I did the first pirate acronym. And I've been presenting Teach Like a Pirate ever since.
Oh, that's wonderful. What do you do with sort of your stereotypically introverted, quiet types of teachers? Do they respond to your material in the manner you'd expect, or how do you approach folks in that genre of personality?
Yeah, that's a common question that teachers will ask me. Is like, I'm kind of an introvert. I'm more conservative. Like, how does this look for me? And there's kind of I go down two paths with that type of person. The first is the slightly confrontational path, in that all progress is found outside of your comfort zone. And so if you're never uncomfortable as an educator, you're probably not growing. So some of these things, it's a matter of maybe it is going to be a little uncomfortable for you at first, but yet that's where growth is found. And it's like when you go to the weight room, and if you only lift weights that you're comfortable with and you never push yourself, then you're probably you're not gonna grow at the level that you could. Same thing is true in teaching. So there's kind of that path. And then the other path is, this is not about Teach Like a Pirate is not about you teaching like me. Teach Like a Pirate is about you taking your strengths, your talents, your voice, and plus what your students are into as well, and then weaving them together with some of these human nature ideas that I talk about Teach Like a Pirate to create the best you. So you don't have to be a somersault, ranting and raving, like kind of cartwheel spinning teacher like maybe I am, in order to teach like a pirate. This is about taking your strengths and your talents, and then a lot of these hooks from Teach Like a Pirate, it's human nature. It's things that naturally draw people in, and you weave together some of that with your strengths to create the best you.
So I want to dive into just a few of the core ideas without giving away too much, because we definitely want our listeners, if you haven't read this book yet, you have to stop everything and get this book. So we'll definitely put a link in our episode description. But I think this is a book every teacher needs to read, because you leave it feeling, empowered and, happy about your work as a teacher, and like you've got new tools to do it well. So let's get into some of the core ideas. And kind of near the beginning, you talk a little bit about passion and enthusiasm, and you allude to this idea that passion really can't be faked, but enthusiasm, you can fake a little enthusiasm. So how do you parse enthusiasm and passion, and what do you mean by like passion can't be faked? What does a teacher do if you're just not into what you're supposed to be teaching the kids?
Yeah, and so I think students are some of the greatest BS detectors in the world, and they can sense a phony, they can sense a fake. And so passion is one of those things that has to come from an authentic place. But what I talk about is the deep, dark secret of education. It's the thing that nobody wants to talk about. And because everyone says you have to have passion, you have to bring passion. They'll say something like this: if you can't find passion for your work, then by God, find new work. Go do something else for a living. But see, the truth, the deep, dark secret is that we're not passionate about everything that we teach. And so part of Teach Like a Pirate is letting the freedom of that like wash over you and say, yeah, okay, I don't have to be passionate about every single thing that's in my content, every single thing that's in my curriculum, right? So, but I know that I need to bring passion. So content passion is just one of the three areas that I discuss in the book. And so maybe your passion is for your content, but if it's not for your content on that day, there's two other categories of passion that you can tap into. One is your professional passions. What is it about just being an educator that you're passionate about? So completely outside of your classroom. And this might be for like creating life-changing lessons for kids, for being that, we're in the life-changing business. So it's about embracing that mightier purpose of being an educator. So finding some sort of life-changing lesson that you can be passionate about that day. And then the other area of passion is your personal passions. What is it that completely outside of education that you're passionate about? And how can you tap into some of that in your lessons. And so that's not just, it'll help you become a more fulfilled educator, a more powerful educator, but it also helps you build a rapport and relationships with kids because you're sharing some of yourself as a part of what you do in your classroom. And so that's one of the big misunderstandings of Teach Like a Pirate, that it's trying to get everyone to teach the same way. Like, no, it's the exact opposite, actually. It's where you're taking some of yourself and things that you're passionate about and weaving them together in a unique way. And so those are kind of the three categories of passion that you can tap into.
So I just wanted to kind of proffer this idea that's in David's book, We're Doing It Wrong, and see what you make of it. So one of his ideas is that teachers ought to be teaching their sacred cows. In fact, I think he ends his chapter with something along the lines of like, the more teachers who are teaching their quote unquote sacred cows, the better off we are. And that's not to imply that we want teachers not teaching standards, but an example would be, here's all of our content standards or process standards, let's say for English. We want teachers choosing the novels they are the most passionate about and not stipulating, okay, everybody in the school district's teaching, this story to hit these standards. I'm wondering what you make of teachers' sacred cows when it comes to curriculum.
I think that's absolutely 100% correct. And you're going to be so much more powerful and effective when you're teaching from that place of passion and that and going through that novel that is something that's very powerful and meaningful for you, and having kids choose their work in the same way, things that are relevant and powerful for them. And so now I'm 100% behind that.
How do we get teachers to embrace that idea within districts where things are tightening? And I'm personally in this wonderful situation where I get to pursue my sacred cows, but I hear from a lot of teachers who aren't in those situations, so they're kind of told these are the curriculum materials to use. What advice would you give educators in a situation like that?
Yeah, so I think even in the most controlling districts, you still have ways that you can bring, you can control the focus of, maybe you can't control the actual book that's being read in some systems, right? But you can control the focus of that book. And even like I've seen, I love in the Wild Card, Hope and Wade King, they talk about how actors will come in and audition for a part, and they'll all be given the same script. But if you were to watch the auditions, you would see wildly different renditions of the same script and different interpretations of that, right? And the same thing can be said for a musician, who they might be playing the same songs, but their interpretation of that song can be totally enthused with their art and their presentation and their creativity. So I think that even in tightly controlled systems, teachers still need to be looking to add their voice. What is unique about you, your particular strengths and talents, and your voice that you add to your classroom is what's always going to make you most powerful and effective with students. And again, it helps to personalize you for your students too. And so I think that even in those systems, you can still add your creative touch, your voice. There's a section of my book that I'm super passionate about. It's called Collaboration versus Collaboration. COLL, collaboration, versus KILL, collaboration. Many systems have misunderstood the purposes of collaboration. Collaboration with a C is something I advocate for everywhere I go. It's made me a remarkably better teacher, and I do it every single chance I can get. But collaboration with a C is about us all coming together to get better, not us all coming together to become the same. It's about improving education, not simply standardizing it. And so I always encourage teachers to fight the cookie cutter at every chance they can, and to add their own personality and their own creative touches and voice to what they do in their classroom.
That really ought to be on a poster that you sell. So if you don't have that poster, it's I'm officially recommending that to you.
All right.
So thinking about the taking that personal spin on your curriculum and the type of creativity that takes, you also talk a lot about teachers needing to be fully in the moment, fully present with their students. So I'm wondering if your sense of the profession that is teaching, if that's becoming is it just as hard to do that now as it was in the past, or are you noticing like the demands of the job are increasing, so teachers are essentially becoming more and more distracted? Help us conceptualize this aspect of being present with your students and how you're doing that as the demands of the job increase.
Yeah, so this is just something that I think is it's true in life. We know, like when we're interacting with someone, you get a sense whether or not that person is fully engaged with you, fully immersed in that interaction, and and we don't like it when we're at a store and the person who's the clerk is not fully interacting with us. We don't like it. We're in a personal relationship and someone is doing something else while we're trying to talk to them, and the same thing is true in education. Immersion is that powerful force. When someone is fully present with you, it's almost magical in nature. It has a hypnotic pull, like this magnetic quality when someone is fully immersed in the unfolding moment with you. So the ability for teachers to fully immerse in that unfolding moment is powerful. I used an example in my book that's kind of strange, but it was where I had a real aha moment. Is I was showing a film in class. I was showing a video in class, and so that would be like the ultimate moment where you think that you would be the most unplugged from your students. Is they're watching a movie is what was happening, and a kid says to me, "Man, like I really love it when you're here instead of a substitute for like when we're doing a movie." And like this was I kind of pressed on them like, "Are you kidding me? Like you're just watching a movie. Like what does it matter if there's a substitute teacher here or me?" And their response was telling like, no, you don't understand. Like when like you like stop, you pause, you talk about like what's coming up next. We're like you're like watching it with us, and like you're filling in gaps, and you're doing. And I realized like wow, like there's even in something that could seem so removed as watching a movie, you could be immersed in the experience with your students, and they can still have a more powerful experience because of what you're doing as the educator. So if even something like watching a movie can be more powerful with an immersed educator, imagine what the rest of what we do can be as far as creating power with kids. And so I think immersion is super powerful as a principle.
So how do you get in that mindset as a teacher if you're, I don't know, I'm just trying to imagine the situation because I think we've all been there where you're behind on your grading, your student learning objective. Maybe your district does something formally there. You're behind on that, or that's got to get done by 4 o'clock today, and you've got all these things piling up. What kind of habits of mind do you pull out in that moment of maybe extreme job stress to be the person you need to be when your kids are in the room with you?
Yeah. Well, and so first of all, I would say that I am certainly not perfect in this regard, right? Because there are times when, hey, this has to be turned in at this time, and I'm doing it, right? And so
Right.
I was certainly not I don't want to say that this is always the case for me, but however, I do think that it's really focusing on that. First of all, understanding the power of that immersion, but it also goes back to that passion, that second category, those professional passions. What is it about being an educator that sets you on fire, and and it's probably making that difference in kids' lives. And so even on those days when we're stressed out about all these other things, if we can kind of come back and embrace that mightier purpose of why we're there, I think that's part of the part of what it is. And when we talked about that enthusiasm being different, um, so there's lots of ways you can control your state. So whether you're tired, whether you're stressed out, there's ways that you can control your state. There's two primary things that control your state: what you focus on and your physiology. So what you focus on is what we just talked about. When you focus on those mightier purpose reasons for being an educator, that's going to change your state. And you can change your physiology as well. And so it's like a shortcut to changing state. When you move your body, like if you want to be, people will say like, how can I become a more powerful and dynamic speaker? I said, well, move your body in a more powerful and dynamic way, right? And and when you move in a powerful and dynamic way, when you speak in a powerful and dynamic way, then this loop happens in your system. Like when you act more enthusiastic, you actually become more enthusiastic. And so, like if you were to watch me walk across campus to the office in the middle of the day, you would think that maybe you're looking at a three-toed sloth moving to the office, right? And and someone says, "Hey, by the way, that's the most energetic teacher on our campus." And you're like, "There's no way. Look at that guy. He's just like shuffling his feet on the way to the office." But then when I step into class and the bell rings, I know how to flip that switch and to turn on the propane. Talk about I don't put steak down on a cold grill. I preheat my grill. I'm ready to turn on the propane and heat things up for the kids. You don't serve cold steak. You don't serve cold food to your kids. You heat things up. So you have to turn on that propane when the kids get there.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I want to go back to like maybe the base level principle here and see if you'd agree with this. Because as I was going through your book again, I was struck with this notion that there's this fundamental idea that you probably believe to be able to write this book. So tell me if I've got this right or where you would disagree. That teachers can be taught how to become better teachers, and that the act of teaching then is distillable to a set of distinct skills that we can then improve upon. And the reason I came up with that idea is like your sort of chapter on standing and delivering. You're really breaking it down with certain strategies. So are those core beliefs sort of underlying all of your work, that number one, great teachers aren't born. You learn how to be a great teacher over time. As simple as that sounds, I think it's important to establish. And then is the act of being a great teacher distillable to distinct and separable skills?
Yeah, so absolutely, I believe that we can all get better, and that there's no such thing as the natural teacher. These are things that can be taught, can be learned, and that was like when I said that. My department chair said, "I don't think that you can teach this stuff. I think that your success is just you." And that, immediately I bristled at that and thought that this doesn't ring true to me. Like this is not something. It's sort of like when people say that, well, you're just naturally creative. It's like, well, no. Do you know what I did behind the scenes to come up with this lesson? Like, do you know how many bad ideas I had before I had this idea? And you know how many disasters I had in my classroom? How many lessons like fell flat? How many lessons blew up in my face before I found something that was successful with my kids? And so a lot of times that's a trap that people fall into, is they see someone who's maybe highly successful at what they do, and they don't, what they miss is they're seeing that tip of the iceberg, or they're missing that whole huge section underneath the water of the hard work and preparation that went into it, that now what appears to be easy for them was actually a struggle all along. And so I do think that teaching is something that can be acquired if you have the willingness, the open mind, and it's an art. So I do think that people that try to quantify it too much and make it measurable, I think are making a mistake. They're missing that a great deal of teaching is the art. Yeah. So yeah, no, I think we can help teachers become better for sure.
And in that betterment of teaching, you kind of have to break it down, right? Because this thing is huge. This thing we call teaching, and I guess I was impressed by your chapter on standing and delivering, because in today's world of education, the last thing you're probably going to hear in most PD sessions, professional development sessions, is how to speak better to your kids, because the message is you should be speaking less. So how do you deal with that aspect of kind of today's movement with education, of guide on the side versus sage on the stage?
Right. And so the pendulum kind of swings back and forth on this, like a lot of things in education. And I think that people make it too much. It's a false dichotomy. And I think there are going to be times that you are speaking in front of your students, no matter what your style is. And so you want to be able to maximize that and be the most effective you possibly can. And when people say that lecture is bad, for example, I don't think they really mean lecture is bad. I think what they mean is bad lecture is bad. Okay. And it's sort of like what people say with like PowerPoint. They say, well, PowerPoint is the most disastrous thing. Some people talk about PowerPoint like it's like if you use PowerPoint, you're a complete loser. Right?
I've heard that before.
What they really mean is bad PowerPoint is horrible, right? And that's the way I feel about lecture. Like I actually love to be in front of someone who is a masterful storyteller, who can enthrall you and draw you in and tell you a beautiful story, right? And that's the way with most. That's the way it is with most people. And so I think there is still a place in education, even with people who think that we should be the guide on the side. For that time that you are in front of kids, you should be seeking to be the best at it you possibly can. We're professional speakers, and that was something I wrote in the book. Is that it's amazing to me how a teacher will say, "Well, I'm actually afraid to speak in public." I'm like, "What are you talking about? That's what you do for a living. Is you speak in public." And so, becoming the best at it you possibly can is part of something I think you should strive for.
So I was came across this recent rendition of a Jim Carrey quote, and these are always wonderful. He said something like, "I make all the wrong decisions, but when I do, I commit completely." And I was thinking, as humorous as that sounds, I wonder if there's a stroke of genius there. So we don't always get things right, but it is one of the keys to being a great lecturer. Just kind of you've formulated this idea, you've planned this out. Now it's time to perform. Don't be questioning your plan in the middle of the lecture. I'm wondering if you would agree with this notion of you might have made the wrong decision, but you ought to commit anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go at it in like a half-assed manner, then you're never going to be successful, right? It's sort of like I'll use the analogy of like taking off with in a plane, and so the pilot, when he starts to head down the runway, if partway down the runway, he's like, "Oh, I'm not sure if we should really do that. Oh, well, maybe we'll go. Oh, maybe I'm not sure." Well, then you never get the plane off the ground, right? You have to commit as the pilot. You have to put the throttle down and go. And if you don't, then you're going to end up crashing off the end of the runway. And the same is true with our lessons. Hey, you've come up with a plan. You got to go for it. You got to go full speed. And it's possible that it might work, but it's for sure not going to work if you don't sell out, right? If you don't really go for it and give it your all. And then it's a matter of being reflective afterwards. Or maybe you start something and you realize that this is a total disaster. And some of my best lessons have happened when there's been a disaster in the classroom and I see something's not gone right and I've had to improvise on the spot. And then sometimes those improvisations have actually become my future lesson. And so, I think there is a place to read where, okay, this is a disaster. I went for it, but now this isn't working.
Yeah, switch gears.
Yeah. So actually, the A of the pirate system stands for two things: ask and analyze. The ask part is the questions that you ask. The key to creativity is questions. And so, like, it's not that we don't have creative teachers; it's that we don't have teachers sometimes asking a creative brand of questions. So, if we can change their question, we can change their creative output. And then the analyze part, that's where you have to look at what's happening in your classroom and analyze results, and take those failures and be reflective and think about what can I switch up, what can I change. And so, like, pirates don't yell at the wind. Pirates don't curse at the wind. Pirates read the wind. They shift their sails and they go. And so the wind of our classroom is student feedback and response. And so you have to be willing to accept that wind, that student feedback and response, and be willing to shift your sails if you need to go a different direction in order to be successful.
Speaking of success as a teacher, I'll kind of, maybe it's more of a statement than a question. I'll just kind of give you my own opinion here. I think one of the reasons that teaching is a hard job is, first, because it's a hard job, but secondly, it's hard to feel successful in your job, because no matter how, I can look at the greatest teacher, that I've ever met or ever worked with, and they're still kids, they're not working, magic. They're still kids who struggle. They're not solving all the problems of the world. And so I'm wondering how you define success as a teacher and what we as a group of teachers can do to start feeling successful. Where's that benchmark where we can feel good about what we're doing? And the reason I ask that is I think that is just absolutely crucial to longevity in the profession.
Yeah. So a quick story. I was setting up for a workshop one day and I heard a mentor teacher talking to a first-year teacher about their classroom. And the teacher was saying, basically, the first year teacher was getting ready to leave the profession. And you can sense that they just thought that they were a total, complete failure because of something that had happened in their class. And so I step into this conversation and we kind of go a little further and say, like, well, what happened? And what happened turned out to be that in a classroom of about 35 kids, there was one kid who popped off and was disengaged and was causing trouble and a behavior problem in the class. 34 kids in this classroom were wildly engaged, love what was happening, but one kid made this teacher feel like they were a total disaster. And that's why in the book I have a section called Life Isn't 100% or Fail. And if you set up a system for success for you as a teacher, is 100% engagement of 100% of the kids on 100% of your days, you have now just set up a system where you're going to have a lifetime of disappointment and failure. Because it's not about 100%. It's about getting better. It's about improvement. And this is something, my first paid job was working 3 years for John Wooden at the John Wooden basketball camps in Cal Lutheran College in Thousand Oaks, California. So for 3 summers, I worked for John Wooden. And his definition of success is one of the most powerful ones I've ever heard. And the way he says it is this. He says, success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to do your best to become the best you are capable of becoming. That's success. if you're doing everything that you possibly can to reach your full potential and to help students reach their full potential, that is success in the classroom. It's like a coach. When like how can you tell which coach is successful? Is it the coach that is 20-0 that season, or the coach that's 5-15, 10-10? What's the well? It's the coach that got the whose team was closest to reaching their full potential, given the talent that they had. That's the successful coach, and so that's the way it is as a classroom teacher as well. And so I think that that is something that's important to longevity, is to convince teachers that it's not about creating some holy grail perfect lesson. It's about constantly striving to get better and better and to reach your full potential and help kids do the same.
Okay, so now from that angle, how do you put parameters on that? Because I I have seen some of the best teachers take that approach, but maybe they take it too far, and they're literally working themselves out of energy. So how do you put a parameter? Because basically, uh, this is what I think occurs to a lot of teachers. If only I was to put in a little bit more time, then I could become the best that I could be for my kids. And we take this personally because we genuinely care about our kids. We all do. So how do you control that?
Yeah. Oh, so first of all, you can't run a car from an empty gas tank, right? Can't teach from an empty gas tank either. And so renewing yourself and it can be a powerful thing, and it's something that's absolutely necessary. And so most people take better care of their, I've heard this said many times, people take better care of their cars than they do of themselves. They're
Mm.
more careful about what they put into the car than what they put into themselves. They're more careful, they're more likely to get a tune up of their car than they would be to get a tune up of themselves. And so that's something that we need to consider. But here's the problem is that we work in a job where we can never be done. And this is kind
Hmm.
of what you're getting at. We can never be done. Like, when was the last time you heard a teacher say, "I've actually got everything all set for the next few weeks"?
I don't think I've
It's
ever heard
impossible,
that.
right? There's always something more we can do. Plus, we know how important what we do is. That's a dangerous combination, because
Yeah.
sometimes it makes us feel guilty at time that we spend outside of education. But every time I've honored my outside passions and interests, or been willing to develop new interests and new hobbies, it's always come back to inform my teaching. It's always come back to make me a better teacher, because it's given me creative ammunition from other areas in life to bring back into my classroom. So I always encourage people to live wide and read wide, because that's where you're going to get those ideas from. And so, like, Teach Like a Pirate actually is a very strange book, and I'm not sure if you notice this when you're reading it or not, but here's something that's very strange about this book. There's not one single education book referenced inside of it, not a single one. Not because I don't like education books. I published them, right? It's because that's not where it came from. It was from the outside, drawn in, right? It was the fact that I had lived wide that I think helped me create Teach Like a Pirate. It's my background as a basketball coach, influenced how I break down instruction and give feedback to kids. My background as a magician influenced my sense of staging and showmanship and incorporation of props. My background as a marketer and entrepreneur helped me, like the way that a marketer creates buzz for a new product or a new service. I create buzz for my lessons. I'm using sales and marketing techniques in my classroom. My background as an MC influenced my professional development speaking style. I'm a person that's used to speaking in a fast and flourishy way on a microphone in front of people. And so all these things came together to create the best me. And so that's why we talked about earlier is that it would be ineffective for anyone to try to teach like me, because my style comes straight out of my lifetime experiences. And so it's about teachers tapping into their lifetime experiences, and to be able to do that, they have to have those experiences. And so it's not just all about education. It's about learning how you can also, when it's time to unplug and renew your spirit, and to spend some time outside, and it's going to help you become a better educator in the long run.
I just want to kind of I feel compelled to now think or state the fact that there's not a line of people just waiting to become teachers. In fact, there's a shortage. So I think it's what you just said is so important, because not only does our success in the classroom matter, but the fact that we keep teaching matters to society, because who else is going to take the job? Some long-term sub in many of these districts with shortages. So yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for that. I wonder about teaching style criticism, and I'm wondering if you've seen that do real damage to teachers. And let me just proffer this scenario, and I'm kind of making this up, but you've got maybe some outside person coming in doing observations. The intent is it's awesome. They want to build collaboration. They want to give teachers feedback. Maybe they'll even call it peer feedback. But then all that really occurs is criticism of a particular style. So maybe it's, well, the teacher talk time to student talk time ratio is off, but there was no actual observation of the outcome. So maybe students were engaged, but they were still criticized on this teacher to student talk ratio. So this is a two-part question. Number one, do we need to avoid those kinds of observations and feedback? And if so, what's the best way to do that? And then secondly, are there certain things about teaching that we ought to be observing more than others? Like, what's the key thing that actually matters if we're observing each other?
Yeah, so I don't think that we need to not have observations and feedback. I think it's actually in some cases we need more of that. One thing I would say is that we don't train or teach people how to give feedback. We don't teach people how to take feedback. We don't teach people how to give feedback. Like that's, for example, like one of the most powerful parts of Lead Like a Pirate by my wife, Shelly and Beth Huff, is they have a section in there about coaching conversations and how to coach like a pirate. And they have these things called anchor conversations and how to have conversations with other educators in such ways where you don't create defensiveness and resistance to your message. And like, for example, the A of the anchor conversation is appreciation. Like if you can't, there's always something you can find that you can appreciate in another person's work. And so if you're not, if you go in looking for things to nitpick, that's what you'll see. If you go on looking for things to appreciate and to notice and notice the impact that those things are having in the classroom, then you're going to have a much different experience as an observer. And so I think that we need to spend more time talking to people about how to observe and how to give feedback. And then also, I think it's also an idea that teachers need to have thick skin as well, and know that I have a section in there that don't let critics steal your soul. And I kind of tell a story about a person that came into my classroom and observed for just a matter of minutes, and then had some snap judgments about what was happening in my classroom, and how sometimes teachers will let that sap their strength. Right? They'll take all the wind out of their sails, that criticism. And so you have to understand, one of my favorite quotes of all time is the Teddy Roosevelt quote about being in the arena, right? I think there's always going to be critics who stand on the sideline and try to nitpick, but the credit goes to the person who's in the arena, the person who's actually taking the risks and is out there, bloodying themselves in order for to as a part of this competition, right? And so, critics don't hold a lot of weight with me because most often they're not in the arena.
That's a good point. What would you say is the most important thing to pay attention to if you are trying to provide the most helpful kind of feedback beyond just what you can appreciate? Like what should you be looking for? Or rather, let me rephrase this. Sorry, I'm sort of butchering this question. Beyond just feeling it, how do you know when you've walked into the classroom of a master teacher?
So I think one of the things that you're looking for is student learning, right? And this is one of the one of the criticisms of Teach Like a Pirate is, well, look at all this extraneous stuff that you're adding to the classroom. This is taking time. This is time that could have been, you're wasting instructional minutes with this little added activity or this little, flourish that you've done as a teacher. And I would say, like, well, it doesn't matter how long you teach. It matters what's learned, right? And so you can teach bell to bell direct instruction and be a horrible teacher because students didn't walk away learning anything. And so it always comes back to, what are students walking away from? What are they walking away with? Did they learn the content that you wanted them to learn on that day? And so I think that's one of the most powerful things to look for. And then what was their experience? Are they more likely to want to be a part of this the next day, or do they want to come back to school the next day? Has this been something that's been positive for them, and they're more likely to become a lifelong learner and understand and want to be a part of the education system going forward? And so that's an important thing to look for as well.
Okay, so it really has more to do with the student outcomes as one might expect, because
Yeah.
you could misjudge and then realize, oh wow, these kids learned a ton, and I just misjudged it because it wasn't my style. Um,
Yeah.
and you mentioned criticism. One of the criticisms of your ideas in Teach Like a Pirate. I wonder, has there been criticism of the book that, like, let me rephrase. What's the best criticism of the book that you found that's made you rethink some of your ideas, if there has been any?
What I would say is the most um, well here. So here's the one that often gets me the most, and they'll say, "Well, I noticed that you didn't have a lot of this in your book, and whatever this might be. Like maybe it's ed tech, like technology integration. There's not a lot of technology integration in my book." Or they'll say, "You know what? I noticed a distinct lack of project based learning in your book," or they'll something like this, right? And so, but what I always tell them is, look, this is not meant to be the encyclopedia teaching. This is not meant to be the Bible for teachers. This was my manifesto. This was my story about what I found to be authentically successful with my students in my classroom. And there's a very great reason why there's not a lot of tech integration in my book. It's because I wasn't very good at it.
All
And
right.
I wanted to write for from an authentic place. And so sometimes you'll see people write books and uh, uh, they say, "Well, I have to. Well, so technology is important. I got to write about this. I got to write about this over here." But they're not really experts in that space. I didn't want to do that. I wrote if I wasn't good at something, I didn't write about it, and so that's why it was super important for me at the end of this process to say, you know what? There's not a lot about creating a student-led classroom in this book. I wonder if there are any other experts out there who I can tap into and have them continue this story. Well, I found Paul Solaris from outside Chicago, and he wrote "Learn Like a Pirate" for us, right? Well, I was not a person who gamified my classroom, but yet I can appreciate the power of gamification in the classroom. I found Michael Matera. He wrote "Explore Like a Pirate." I didn't use design thinking in my classroom, but AJ Giuliani and John Spencer were great at it. So we published Launch, and and so creating this little wider experience of books through Dave Burgess Consulting was not just about. It was about saying like, hey, I know I didn't write that whole story. I'm not good at ed tech. Matt Miller is. Let's do Ditch That Textbook. Alice Keeler is. Let's do book with Alice Keeler. And so it's always about finding people that can complement the message and build it out. And so, you don't want me to write a book on ed technology because that would not be written from an authentic space.
So talk to us just a little bit about your build a team idea. What does that look like in Teach Like a Pirate, and how do you get your crew together?
Yeah. I think that part of what makes you successful as a teacher is creating a diverse crew. And that's what pirates are known for, having a diverse crew. And so I'm looking to collaborate with people who are outside of my space. And when I say that, I don't just mean educationally outside of my space. I mean even outside of education. So, like for example, the first thing I did when I wrote this book, I wanted to have an editor for this book, but I wanted someone who was outside of education. I wanted someone who was more in the entrepreneurial marketing and success space. And so I found Aaron Casey, who's been a wonderful editor for all of our projects. I read wide. I don't spend most of my time in the education section of the bookstore. I'm in other sections of the bookstore because it's that wideness again that's going to help me grow and expand my view of the world. And so Teach Like a Pirate is a mindset. It's a way of looking at the world and saying, how can I use that? Like, what do other professions use to engage? And how can I use that in my profession? What are kids into outside of school? How can I use that inside of school? And so it's always about looking around the world and saying, how can I use that? Like, what is it? March Madness, for example. How can I use millions of people are into March Madness. Well, how can I use March Madness in my classroom? What is it about March Madness that draws people in? And how can I layer some of those same principles into my classroom? And so it's always said, what is it around the world that is engaging to people? Why is it engaging for them? And then trying to find ways to layer that in, and always trying to look at other people and other professions and saying, there's probably something that they have to teach me that would help me become a better teacher. They're successful in their line of work. I wonder what they do that could help me.
And it sounds like you've kind of done that formally with your publishing company. And I want you to, if you don't mind, give our listeners just a bit more information about what you've got going there with the other books you're publishing, and where can they find more information about all that.
Yeah, so I run a publishing company with my wife, Shelly, and Dave Burgess Consulting Inc. And what we do is we actively try to find people who we think have powerful educational messages and help them spread it in an effective way. And what we've done is we thought the publishing industry is based on an outdated model. And it was time to be disrupted. When you see something that's based on an outdated model, like many people feel about education, it's time to disrupt it. Like what happened to Blockbuster through Netflix, or iTunes did to the music industry. It was time to disrupt the publishing industry. And so we try to find people who we think have powerful messages and give them contracts, which give them fair compensation for their intellectual property, and then do everything we can to help them spread that message. And so we're always looking for powerful people. You can find us at daveburgessconsulting.com. You can find me at daveburgess.com. And a great place to connect with me is on Twitter. I am at Burgess Dave. My wife is at Burgess_Shelley, Shelley with an EY on the end, but I'm at Burgess Dave. I pretty much live on Twitter. You can always find me there.
So out of your repertoire, if a teacher has read Teach Like a Pirate, loves it, and wants more, what's the next best book to get?
Oh man, that's
I'm putting you in a tough spot, huh? I really should not have asked you that. But thinking of continuing the genre of your book.
Yeah, so we have something, no matter what you're interested in, we have something for you. If you want books that are about engagement, we have fantastic books about that, from the wild card to play like a pirate to, again, like explore like a pirate, things like this. And we have books about innovation, The Innovator's Mindset by George Couros. We have books that will inspire you. Kids Deserve It. All these. We have an incredible line of books. We're about to come out with our 60th book. And so I certainly wouldn't want to choose one, because I think they're all fantastic, and they're all in their own way. If you have any questions, if someone has a question about, hey, here's what I want to learn about, what would be the best in your line, I'd be happy to answer that for them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't realize you'd published so many. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Any last words? Anything else we should take away from this conversation or know about Teach Like a Pirate?
You know what? I would say just don't let this be a one-time thing. Make sure you get connected. Becoming a connected educator, I think, is super important. And what you might not be getting the support in your system. You might not be getting the professional development in your system that you feel that you require, but that's out there for you. And we have communities of people that you can tap into and get that support, get that inspiration, and get that collaboration. And so if you don't feel like you're getting that kind of support in your system, connect with us, and we'll find the community that you can tap into and be a part of, where you'll be able to get that. So don't let this be a one-time thing. Let this be the start of a conversation, not the end. And I hope to connect with your listeners.
Well, this has been immensely fun and beneficial for me personally as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we wish you the very best. I think you're doing great work, so thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, there are several ways you can support our work. First and foremost, you can subscribe to our podcast via iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or just using our RSS feed. And giving us reviews helps more than you think. If you want to provide direct support, we have a support tab on our main page, we'redoingitwrong.com, that links to our Patreon account. Patreon's a neat system that allows you to pledge a dollar amount per episode produced and set a monthly maximum. So you only pay when you get new content you love. But most importantly, we just appreciate your listenership. Thank you.